Hey guys, it's Reynad. So today I'm going to make a video that's describing, possibly the biggest challenge that I'm going to have when it comes to designing the bazaar. And it's something that's very relevant to every other card game in the world, and it's something, I think if done right, makes a card game extremely fun. And when it's done wrong, a card game just doesn't feel good to play. So, and what that is designing archetypes of decks. So what is an archetype? An archetype is a overall strategy for a combination of cards. It's like a strategy for a deck. So like aggro is a very broad archetype. Control is a very broad archetype. Zoo is an archetype. It's aggressive warlock, right? Even lock or hand lock, also archetypes. When I use those terms, when I say like even lock, I didn't name a single card name, but the overall strategy that deck is going to have. Right, in Magic, this can be like Storm or, Fish or whatever. When it comes to the Bazaar, even though it's a deck building game, it's not one of those games where you make a deck ahead of time. Archetypes are still really important, and there's something that I have to design in the game in a very, I have to do it right, and if I fuck it up, then it's not going to be a very fun game. I kind of wanted to go over some of the challenges of that and what I mean by archetypes. A deck building game is very different, obviously from a traditional type of card game like Magic, where you build your deck before you play the game. Hearthstone's the same as Magic in that sense, right? You build your deck and then you play the game with your deck. When you do that, you're still picking an archetype, right? When I play Druid, I'm committing to an archetype of Druid, right? Either I'm token archetype of Druid, or I'm the taunt archetype of Druid with Hadronox. And once you commit to that archetype before your game and you start playing with that deck, then your deck, ideally, if it's built well, is going to play the same way every time. If I'm playing token Druid, I want to be drawing Wild Growth, playing it on turn 2, ramp a little bit. I want to make a bunch of tokens. I want to kill my opponent with Savage Roar. When I'm playing taunt Druid, again, I want to ramp. I want to play taunts to not die for a while. Then I want to play Okart, or I want to play Hadronox and recover all my taunts. No matter what archetype you pick, in a game like Magic or in a game like Hearthstone, once you've built your deck, once you've decided on an archetype, your deck plays the same way every time, ideally. So this is one of the great things about deck building games, is that there's a lot more variety in that sense, where like if I'm playing Druid in Hearthstone, like every game, doesn't even matter what archetype, I need to draw Wild Growth on turn 2. Like I want to draw Wild Growth on turn 2. I want to play Ultimate Infestation when I have 10 mana. I want to be playing Nourish in the mid game. Like it's not just the cards that are in every deck that are the problem. It's like if I play Token Druid, I want to do the same thing every game. So when you play 100 games of that deck, it gets pretty repetitive, because every game you're trying to make a bunch of dudes, you're trying to Savage Roar and kill your opponent with them. So the beauty of deck building games is that even though you're playing the same class over and over and over again, you're building a different archetype every single time. And when it comes to, being the guy making a deck building game, it's very hard to do. A deck building game is going to present you with all these options, and then you buy cards that are in front of you, and you decide mid-game what archetype you want to build, right? Your opponent's doing stuff, you're doing stuff. You want to counterplay his strategy and all of that. And based on your decisions, you build a deck, and then that deck's going to have its own archetype. What does that mean for designing a deck building game? Well, let's say that I have, in the wizard class, this circle represents all the cards for the wizard class. All the cards in this circle are the cards that the wizard class has in the game. And in there's like, all the cards are flavored in a wizardy way, right? Some of them are potion related, a bunch of them do spell stuff, some of them do lightning attacks and blizzards and shit. And you end up having all of these different cards that are wizardy, but they don't really cater to a specific archetype. This is like in the very like pre alpha stages of the game. This is how I was testing it, right? I bought some arts and crafts supplies. I made some paper mock-ups, and I just started playing with cards that felt wizardy. With some people to see if the game engine made sense. What you end up having when you design a class this way, all of your cards are thematically on point. You can objectively rank the cards. You can say that card A is better than card B, is better than card C, and when you end up being confronted with a decision of, okay, well, which one of these 3 cards am I buying this turn? You're always going to pick the card that's better, right? This is the best card. I'm always buying this card. This is the best card of the 3. I'm always buying this card. You're not really like building towards an archetype or strategy or even really taking into account what your opponent's doing that way. All you're really doing is picking the best card among the 3 presented to you. And that has a lot of drawbacks because you don't feel like you're in control of what your deck is going to end up being. You're just kind of like picking the best card out of the ones available to you. There's some skill in figuring out like which cards are better, but long story short, you don't have as much control as a player. So you end up drafting the cards that are just objectively the best in a vacuum. And then your deck, just like in Hearthstone, just like in Magic, your deck ends up playing the same way every time. Every wizard deck is going to end up playing in a wizardy way with just a mixture of potions and spells and crap. Because I, as a designer, did not introduce archetypes into the game ahead of time. So I think the best way to do this is you're going to have, we'll keep using wizard as an example. You're going to have archetype 1, a bunch of cards, all wizard themed, that are all within one archetype. So these can all be cards that are like cryomancer cards, right? All these cards are like ice themed. Within the stores, there's a bunch of ice wizard cards that are going to be showing up. Now beyond that, you're going to have archetype 2, which is going to be, let's say, alchemy. So you're going to do a bunch of potion stuff, right? And archetype 3 is going to be, let's say, like fire wizard. And now when you have 3 options available to you in the stores in the game, now you're going to have a card that is, one's going to be ice themed, one's going to be fire themed. It is so hard to write with a mouse, holy crap. And then you're going to have one that's, whatever, potions and stuff. And, sometimes there'll be 2 fire cards, 1 ice card, whatever. As a person playing the deck building game, you're going to pick like, okay, let's say I'm going to draft this ice card. Now I'm incentivized to draft more ice cards. You're going to pick a fire card. Okay, I'm incentivized to pick more fire cards. And all these archetypes are going to have cards that synergize with each other, but not necessarily with the other ones. So if you're halfway into a game and you've been picking mostly fire cards, the ice cards all of a sudden don't look as appealing to you because you don't have as much synergy to go with that. Now, there will, of course, be hybrid cards. So like here, you're going to have a combination of these 2 archetypes. So what I mean by that is like in the wizard class and the cards that can possibly show up, there's going to be some hybrid cards, some cards that appeal to the ice and fire class together. They're like hybrid cards. You want them in both of these archetypes. You're going to have some cards that work with ice and alchemy, right? Some frost potion cards or something. Then you're going to have, alchemy and fire cards. And then you're, in general, just going to have, like, neutrals that are, cards that are good in whatever deck they're in. These are good in everything. And now, instead of drafting that same wizard deck every time, like in a game where you don't pre-build archetypes, now all of a sudden we have 3 large categories that all the cards in the game fit into. So now instead of just having this one wizard deck that's going to play out the same every game because you're just going to pick the best wizard cards every game. Now, depending on the cards that come up, you can either go into the alchemy or the ice or the fire wizard plan, right? And this is where kind of magic drafts come to mind because in a game of Magic, when you're drafting, you're going to have cards of different rarities, right? You open a pack, you're going to get a rare, and you're going to get a few uncommons, and you're going to get a bunch of commons. And in general, the rares and the uncommons are going to have more powerful effects than the common cards. So if I open this pack and I get like a True Fire Captain, like that's a really powerful card. So because I open this pack in my first pack of a draft, I'm going to pick the True Fire Captain, right? I'm going to take this card. And now I'm very, very incentivized to go into the red-white deck because now I have a really good red-white card. And this card was so much better than these other cards that showed up. So in the bazaar, cards are also going to have different drop rates, right? It's a loot table, so different cards have different rarities. So let's say that your first few cards are presented to you, and you have like a common average fire card, a common average potion card, and you have an uncommon or a legendary ice card that's like super strong. You're incentivized to take the ice card in the first pick of your game. You're going to buy your ice card, add the ice card to your deck, and now you're incentivized to draft the ice deck. Now, if there weren't different rarities, you could just say like, okay, well, the fire archetype is just stronger than alchemy and wizard, so I'm just going to force the fire cards every time. That's also not fun, right? Then again, you end up with the same deck. But by distributing the different rarities, you end up having a different game plan every single game that you play wizard. Even though you're drafting from the same cards, overall, the same pool of cards, every game that you play, your deck's going to play out differently because your first few picks are going to incentivize you to go in a certain direction based on having higher power level cards. In a perfect world, right, this is how it plays out. I think this is like the ideal way to design a class. This isn't the entirety of how I do it. There's certain outliers, both in traditional like Magic type games and in deck building games that I think make a lot of sense. So like there's going to be these outlier cards, just random, not random, but specific cards that show up that build a unique deck completely around themselves. So in the Hearthstone example, this would be like Kingsbane. Kingsbane makes its own archetype and it's one card, right? This can be like quests, like in Hearthstone. I'm still using Hearthstone examples, right? A quest just makes its own archetype by itself. Hearthstone started making more and more cards like this because it's a way to design a single card in a set of 150, and just by making one card, you generate a new archetype, a new deck name that you can label, and it makes the metagame look very diverse and be more diverse. I think, ideally we have like, maybe the wizard will find like some legendary stone tablet card that makes him want to collect all the tablets or something that show up, and you would never want to pick the tablet cards usually, but now all of a sudden, like, you don't care if it's fire tablets or ice tablets or whatever, you're building the tablet deck, right? And that's like the Kingsbane of the wizard class. So you want to have these outlier archetypes as well. And when you have this kind of ecosystem within a deck or within a pool of cards within a class, now all of a sudden, instead of building the same wizard deck every time, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different just macro archetypes that you can build just in Wizard, depending on what shows up. That's one class in the game. So it gives you a ton of variety and a ton of depth to the types of decks that you can build in a deck building game. And it's interesting to me that this whole archetype principle is something that really translates between different genres of card games, both in deck building games and in games like Magic and Hearthstone. The whole archetype principle, I think, makes a lot of sense, which is why it's one of the few cases where I can use like Hearthstone examples to talk about deck building gameplay. Just the difference is, in a game like Hearthstone or Magic, you build your deck before you play the game. You commit to an archetype before you play the game. In a deck building game, you figure out your archetype as you go. I hope this kind of makes sense. And this is very hard to do, right? Because there's ways to do this in a way that's pretty lame, and then there's more elegant ways to do this. One way to do it is I could just say, hey, all the ice cards get stronger the more of them you have. And all the fire cards get stronger the more of them you have. And all the alchemy cards get stronger the more of them you have. And I mean, that would certainly work. You would technically get different archetypes, but it would all be like similar gameplay, right? Like the power level of your deck would scale depending on how many of the same archetype cards you got. As soon as you commit to one fire card, you just want to pick all the other fire cards. It doesn't really incentivize like creative and interesting decision making. The trick is finding a way for like big archetypes to complement each other. Like an example of this can be, I don't know if those of you that play Magic in the newest expansion, right? It's the Ravnica world again. There's 2 color combinations. Like Dimir is blue-black and Golgari's black-green. They're both black, right? They both share that color. So they're related. The Dimir mechanic, Surveil, puts stuff in your graveyard, and then the Golgari mechanic, Undergrowth, rewards you for having stuff in your graveyard. So the 2 archetypes that are like closer to each other have complementary mechanics, but they are different guilds completely, if that kind of makes sense. So that's like a more elegant way of doing it where, if I'm the Golgari deck and I'm drafting in Magic, if I'm the Golgari deck, I'll still want to pick up some Surveil cards sometimes, right? Or if I'm the Dimir deck, I'll want to pick up some Undergrowth cards sometimes. Again, I know that example is not going to make sense for everybody. You have to play the game to get that one. But I think Magic did it in like a very elegant way in recent expansions where, you're not just like incentivized to only pick cards from this archetype once you start doing it. But there's actually like complementary ways that you can build these hybrid archetypes between the two. So ideally in the Bazaar, most decks are going to end up being in this zone here, like one of these hybrid classes. I think that's where most decks will fall. And you'll have your one-off games with your Build Around Me card with these outliers. I hope this kind of makes sense. This is really the challenge right now is Wizard for Merchant, for Chef, for Vampire, for Engineer. I have to build macro archetypes for all of them, ideally 3 of them, 3 macro archetypes, and then hybrid cards between the 2, right, that work between two archetypes in a way that's complementary, some generalist cards that are just good in every deck, but then also distribute that across a loot table where every card has a different drop rate, so that the higher power level cards are, maybe the uncommons that show up, and those are the cards like this True Fire Captain. Those are the cards that are going to pull you towards an archetype early on, so that you're not just forcing the same archetype every single game. You want to be able to, if you see a really sick alchemy card in a game, you want to be able to go towards the alchemy deck. If you see a really sick ice wizard card, you want to go towards the ice deck. Because if you're playing a bunch of games of wizard, you don't just want to be forcing the same archetype every game. That's what gets boring. That's what gives players burnout in a card game. And that's why, playing 500 games of druid in a row is not that fun for most players, even players that commit to that many games of one class in a game like Magic or Hearthstone. I hope this kind of makes sense for you guys. This is really from a card design standpoint, this is the gameplay challenge. This is my solution that I'm basically showing you. This is what I want the ecosystem to look like. The trick is building the individual cards and the mechanics in a way that aligns with this kind of ecosystem. It's definitely doable. I've gotten close. I'm always going to be a perfectionist. There's always something that can be improved, but we're getting there. I just think from a gameplay standpoint, this is the bird's eye view of how an optimal card game ecosystem should look. I'm going to try to create this. It's super hard to do. It's very time consuming, and to be honest, I don't think it can be a solo project. I think I'm going to have to find a lot of game designers to bounce ideas off of for this. I think it's coming along well. I have the solution, which is good. I think it's the hard part, right? Now it's a matter of execution. We can do this for every class. We have an excellent game. An excellent game. If we can't do this very well, that's where it's going to fall short. Every card game that comes out doesn't even think about things this way. Magic does it because they've been around for 200 years. And Hearthstone, I think, has started to do it in the last 2 years. But even in the case of Activision Blizzard, they weren't even thinking about this shit for the first few years. And again, this is my way, and as a player, this is the way I've codified what makes a good card game ecosystem. This might not be the way they look at it, but this is the way, in my brain, it makes sense. Hopefully this is enlightening for some of you guys, or hopefully it's a perspective some of you haven't thought about, but this is my challenge. This is the solution. I have to work towards building this for every single class in the game. If you guys have questions, hit me up. Yeah, can't wait to show you some more stuff about the bazaar. See you next time.